Please welcome AECOM Vice President Linda Chu and Vice President Brian Sands.
Information later. It's kind.
Go ahead.
Good morning. Welcome to 10 Trends
In 10 minutes.
For those of you who don't know, Brian and I are attraction economists helping the industry figure out market and business issues.
And we're here today to give you a little taste of what we're seeing in the industry, and we're going to do it in 10 minutes. So Linda, the clock is a-ticking.
Well, let's get started, Brian. Lauren told us all about how people are spending a lot in this industry. So what are they spending on? That leads me to trend number one, what I call Immerse Me. Immersive and Instagrammable experiences have officially infiltrated our industry. While these experiences often are branded as pop-up, many of them are becoming permanent and also expanding to multiple locations. They blur art and entertainment and range from whimsical tributes to food to more serious art experiences. Examples include the well-known Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, currently expanding to new locations, Candytopia, where candy pigs spew confetti at you, Wisdom in Los Angeles, where you can have a near-religious meditation ceremony experience, the Museum of Pizza in New York, where you can see Totino's-sponsored Pizza Heaven diorama featuring dead pizza rolls in the clouds, the Rose Mansion, where you can climb into a bathtub filled with rose petals, and Human's Best Friend, where you can bring your dog to be immersed and have over 20 photo opportunities. So all kidding aside, what do these things have in common with respect to business model and economic characteristics? One, most of them are for profit, although they are often called museums or art experiences that make you think they're nonprofit. Two, they attract very large numbers of people, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people in very short times. They often sell out and have very long lines. Three, they're attracting millennials, the millennials that Lauren talked about, maybe Lauren, families, and social media influencers, about a third with each of those groups. Four, very high price points with minimal discounting, so very high admission yield. Five, multiple experiences at any given time within the same market, all competing against each other. Six, significant corporate sponsorships. And seven, very little repeat visitation. Although they are working on temporary shows, such as Sprinkles, currently running at the Museum of Ice Cream in San Francisco, which has transitioned from a temporary to now a permanent attraction. So we think that these are here to stay for a while at least, not just a passing fad, and they certainly are taking some of that leisure dollars, those leisure dollars away from other kinds of attractions. When the Museum of Ice Cream founder, who now sells her branded ice cream products in Target, was asked about her vision, she said, "I want to be the next Disney. I love Disneyland, but it's just not for today. Our generation doesn't want to spend 6 hours doing anything." That's one perspective, and certainly food for thought, if you will. Brian, over to you.
Thank you. And to hold there, we got a little ahead of ourselves.
Oops.
Thank you. So after that fun and excitement, I'm going to bring us back to earth with who said this would be easy. This is a reminder that our business is tough, and this is doubly true in developing markets, where it seems to be an unfortunate trend to sometimes spend a lot on a park without always taking care of the basics. By this I mean spending a lot on, say, land, infrastructure, and equipment, without spending enough on the basics of theming, landscaping, signage, programming, training, and the like. Compounding the situation is the rush to open, even if the park is not really ready for visitors, due, for example, to some rides not yet operating. In our age of instant social media, this is very harmful to a park's performance initially and actually on an ongoing basis. Even more fundamental than the design, construction, and operation of a park is the need to give proper consideration to things like size of the markets and its characteristics, the competitive environment, location and access, and even the weather. If these aren't properly evaluated and considered, then even a great visitor experience cannot compensate. I'd like to say that this trend won't continue, but based on things we're seeing around the globe, I sense that it in fact will. Back to you, Linda.
Okay, well, everyone got a preview of this. Crazy Rich Asians. So this trend is not about what was one of my favorite all-time movies of this year, but rather about what we're seeing in our Asian economics practice. As many of you know personally, last year in China there was a sharp slowdown in projects, not necessarily due to the economy, but due to government restrictions on gray market financing. There was a lot of off-balance sheet financing in the market. Many projects were put on hold or canceled as development financing was cut. It seems as if the worst is over now, and we are starting to see both local governments and developers looking at projects again, but it certainly was a tough time. Southeast Asia is still relatively strong, especially in Vietnam and Manila. In China, we are seeing some shifts in consumer behavior, with a stronger interest and demand for experiences and slightly a less focus away from luxury goods. We're seeing a rise in farm-based experiences and attractions where developers take over farms or historic towns about 1 to 2 hours outside the city, add activities, and attract wealthy families with cars who want to escape the city. Theme park developers are starting to look at some of these, and there's frequently residential developed around them. There's also a rise in the desire for scary activities, building rickety trails along cliff edges that people can walk on, and creating scary glass bridges, including one in Hubei province that is designed so that you can both hear and see it cracking as you walk across it.
Scary.
What's next, Brian?
Well, my next trend is sweet dreams are made of this. That is to say, the addition of lodging to parks, which is something we've talked about before, but seems to be accelerating and deepening. For example, last year, Merlin added over 600 keys at 3 parks, and this year plans to add another 400. As you can see, the properties are very heavily themed, and they're understood to be performing very well financially. This trend has been going on some time at Universal Orlando Resort, with a series of hotel openings over the past few years, and this year and next year they'll open 2 more, resulting in a wide range of theming and pricing. Internationally, this trend is occurring as well, such as at the newly opened Museum Hotel at Europa Park, which is part of the new Rulantica Indoor Water Park. The hotel itself is themed after a natural history museum. Disney has long been in the lodging sector, as evidenced, of course, by Disneyland Hotel right here. And rumors are that the new Disney Star Wars Hotel will be an experience in and of itself, rivaling actually the new land. Given the ability of lodging to enhance the visitor experience in multiple ways and to drive operator revenue, I would say that this trend will definitely continue. Linda?
Okay, you can't take it with you. Retail versus experience. With the decline of retail that we all know about, mall operators are seeking all sorts of indoor entertainment as a necessity, either to reuse closed department stores or as new development to attract visitors. Some examples are Ocean 5 at the Olympic Town Center near Seattle. It's almost a 60,000 square foot FEC, upscale FEC, that includes a high-end farm-to-table restaurant, bowling alleys, bars, event space, comedy nights, and Brian's favorite, Mario Kart tournaments. Legend Heroes, a Singapore-based indoor VR theme park, is actively looking for old Sears and JCPenney stores to open their parks in across the US. Italy, originally from New York, has become the anchor for the renovated Century City Mall in Los Angeles. And throughout the Midwest and South, former Sears department stores are being replaced by things like Bistroplexes, Whirly Ball facilities, Kidzania, and Top Golf. I think we're about halfway done here, Brian. What do you have next?
All right, well, speaking of the top, Linda, let's talk about top observation experiences and competition. When I look at this picture of Midtown Manhattan, I see money, lots of it. You do too, probably. The problem is apparently so do a lot of other people, since in that picture there are 3 operating observation experiences shown: Top of the Rock, Empire State Building, and soon to open the Edge at Hudson Yards. Also located in downtown Manhattan, One World Observatory, which of course has won a Thea Award. There are also several other observation experiences in Manhattan that are under consideration or actively in construction. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Global population is growing. Domestic and international tourism is rising, as Lauren indicated. And technology is allowing us to build higher and higher. So we should be able to have more of these experiences, right? But you have to ask, can New York handle that many of this kind of attraction? And can other global markets do that as well? Fortunately, one place to look for how observation experiences can stay fresh and competitive is the Space Needle, where they've recently gone through a $100 million renovation, created a really fun visitor experience, and are actually driving the bottom line as well. All right, back to you, Linda.
Well, speaking of fun, it's an adventure. There's been a rise in adventure parks and experiences across multiple geographies, and this goes far beyond the traditional zip line or ropes course that we've seen over the years. The design and quality of these parks has improved, and they are starting to be branded and incorporate IP. The best example of this is probably the Bear Grylls Adventure, of course, an adventure park opened last year in the UK based on the popular TV series Man vs. Wild. This nearly 90,000 square foot park is operated by Merlin and includes a salt room, scuba dive tanks, indoor skydiving, archery, escape rooms, and high ropes courses. In China, Apex Recreation is opening branded Discovery Channel adventure parks across China. These parks include obstacle courses, rock climbing, adventure trekking, hot air balloon rides, and wilderness survival programs. And even right here in the US, the rise in popularity of the television show American Ninja Warrior and the growth of Spartan races has spurred an increase in indoor and outdoor training facilities that offer some of the same activities.
Great. Well, since I love to play and I also love technology, I am very excited about this next trend, which I call Play to Win, which highlights the growth of the centers of competitive gaming, also known as esports. Now, before you laugh, according to Goldman Sachs, last year esports had a global monthly audience of nearly 170 million people, larger than that of Major League Baseball. By 2022, a few years away, that market is expected to be 275 million monthly viewers, rivaling the NFL. Furthermore, Netflix recently stated that its main competition is not other entertainment media outlets like HBO, but actually gaming. This trend is particularly strong in Asia, with a number of projects recently opened and more in the pipeline. That said, it remains to be seen if these projects can make significant money and actually act as a catalyst for local development. It also remains to be seen how well this trend can be leveraged within parks, though I'm sure we'll see a lot of activity in this in the coming years, such as within Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios Japan, which opens next year. So I say stay tuned for more fun and games. Back to you, Linda.
Okay, my last trend, just for you. In order to attract new audiences and new demographic groups, we're seeing a lot of attractions who are customizing and personalizing experiences, primarily in three ways. The first way is technology, which gives me the chance to talk about, I think, my favorite museum I've been to in probably the last 5 years. The National Comedy Center in Jamestown, New York, uses RFID technology to select your brand of comedy that follows you throughout your experience. And there's, of course, the karaoke comedy experience, which I was able to do. If you get to Western New York, which I know it's hard to get to, definitely go. Second category is specialized tours. Disney's Caring for Giants experience, where guests can meet with special animal specialists who care for the African elephant herd, and Museum Hack, a third-party operator that leads unorthodox tours and team-building activities in museums across the country. Finally, we've seen a lot of attractions finding very unique partners to draw new audiences. An example of this is Yoga at the Met or the Airbnb experience at the Louvre. So Brian, can you top that?
Oh, I got that. This last trend, going big and doubling down, is of course one that we've seen throughout the history of parks and attractions. That's because ours is a very competitive industry and also because it's a very creative one, with each industry player trying as hard as possible to constantly create new and better visitor experiences within the bounds, of course, of available money for investment, programming, and the like. That said, the scale of recent actions and investments is remarkable. From Six Flags taking over water parks and markets where it has existing theme parks, to SeaWorld investing in new rides, lands, and programming, to remarkable new technologies like the slide wheel at Chimelong Water Park, which won a Thea Award this year. Of course, when it comes to going big and doubling down, we have to close on Disney's new Star Wars Galaxy's Edge lands. Here's a little preview of what looks to be an amazing experience. May the Force be with us all. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'd also like to remind you that if you would like to learn more about trends in the industry, the theme index will be coming out soon, the latest version in about 6 weeks from now, so look for it. And thanks very much for everybody who helps us every year to put that together. Thank you.
Well, wait on, hold on. Now, it's time to hear from some real experts, and you've noticed we actually have people on the stage here with us. I'd like to introduce some of them. You've met Lauren already. On my far left here, Owen Zhao is the owner of MinMax International. He has 20 years of experience working with themed entertainment products in China and the West. He is the vice president and next president of the TEA Asia Pacific Division. Thank you, Owen. And I know you had a very long flight out here, so thank you. Next to me, we're very happy to have Elizabeth Merritt. She's the founding director for the Center for the Future of Museums, the American Alliance of Museums vice president for strategic foresight, and the author of the annual AAM Trends Watch report. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Also joining us today is Kieran Burke, to my right, Chairman, President, and CEO of Premier Parks, which is a portfolio of 12 theme and water parks across the U.S., and recently added a museum to that portfolio as well. Thank you for joining us. And further to my right is Matt Dawson, Vice President of Business Development for Forec, a global entertainment design company. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
All right, let's get started. We usually start with the theme park side of things, but we're going to start with museums today. So Elizabeth, if I can just ask you, what are some of the most dramatic changes that you're seeing in the museum industry now, particularly with respect to the economic and business model for museums?
Sure, Linda, and especially since we're talking about economic models, I want to make it clear that even though the American Alliance of Museums represents museums of all types and sizes, including some for-profit museums, I'm principally talking about the nonprofit model now. And nonprofit museums for decades relied on a very diverse and stable mix of earned income from tickets and sales, philanthropic funding from individuals and foundations, government funding, principally state and local, and then if they were lucky enough to have an endowment, draw on the endowment. All of those took a hit in 2008. And what we're seeing as we recover is we're never going to recreate the past. The forces that underlay those sources of income have fundamentally shifted, and museums are having to really rethink where they're getting their income from. Two things complicating that are, first of all, it's turning out that of the many things museums do, any of the profitable bits, nonprofits are really savvy at saying that bit, I could do that bit without taking on all the unfunded mandates, like collecting, preserving, and education. So you can take incredibly successful touring exhibits without being a museum. You could run a hotel that has art in it without being a museum. So that's a challenge. You know, when we find a piece of what we do that's profitable, somebody else could do it without other associated costs.
Like the Museum of Ice Cream.
Like, well, don't go there, please.
Don't mean to pick on that one.
The second challenge is really interesting, which is there's a rise of new hybrid models of businesses like low-profit, limited liability corporations, L3Cs, and benefit corporations that both make a profit and report a demonstrable social or environmental good, and that's explicitly part of their mandate. So it's okay for them to like take a hit on what they could make a profit on in order to be doing that social or environmental good. That means that they have access to certain kinds of capital that museums don't have. They can even get certain kinds of nonprofit foundation funding, and they're out there doing good in the world. So they're competing in the arena of being a mission-based organization. So between those two sets of competitors, museums are saying, what are we going to do? What's our real strength? I still believe that the heart of that is going to lie in demonstrating a public benefit, being mission-based. But it begs the question of what's the economic basis for that?
Well, and that brings up an interesting question, if I may.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about this sort of screen versus place.
Okay.
And some of the things we were talking about with respect to immersive trends, but museums are generally place-based experiences.
Yeah.
But digital content, entertainment, and media are becoming increasingly effective and takes up larger amounts of leisure time. How are museums competing, or are they?
Right, and this feeds into the economic model again, because the more people love you in the end, somehow you can get some money out of that. And one of the things that digital can do is it can increase museums' reach. It's actually kind of funny that if you go back 20 years, you actually can read about museums being nervous about putting all their stuff online because, oh my gosh, if we give it all away, will anybody come? The good news is all of the data suggests so the more you push your stuff out, the more people want to come in. And museums that have been aggressively generous with sharing their high-quality digital content and assisting people in using it, adapting it, and mashing it up, making it available under Creative Commons license, have thrived as a result.
That's great.
You can also use these digital experiences to make the place-based experience more compelling. But of course, so can for-profits, right? So the deepest and highest use seems to be really using it as an imagination engine to help people who weren't already museum lovers learn how to immerse themselves in history or art, give them a boost so that they can actually interact with an AI-powered chatbot to talk to a historical figure, interact with artwork in a way that feels more gamified and accessible to them, so as a good entree in. The downside is that investing heavily in digital has enduring costs, especially if, like a museum, you're in the long-term game of preservation. If you're trying to collect and preserve born digital art, if you're trying to document the world for future generations and store that data digitally, that's a large deferred cost we have yet to measure and plan for. How are we going to maintain those digital assets over time?
That's a really good point. What about, one of the things we've talked about is how the role of museums has shifted with respect to public policy and social change, and how the expectations for museums are now different. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure, and let me start with the fact that this is one of the sources of museums' competitive advantage that they have to figure out how to capitalize on. In an age of a massive decline of trust in government and industry, in all sources of information, museums remain among the most trusted sources of information. On the other hand, it puts us in a tricky position, because if we are saying that our place in the world is to do public good, that we're there for public benefit, then it behooves us to use that trust to tackle big, important issues that matter to our public. And that means taking a stand on certain things. Now, increasingly, people are recognizing museums, nothing is actually neutral. Museums have always taken a stand. It's just when it's sort of reinforcing the dominant narrative, you don't notice because it doesn't stand out against a background. But when museums say, no, it's important, this is an important issue in our community, you know, police-mediated violence. If somebody got shot, what are we going to do to come in and help the community process that event and think about it both in terms of historic context and how they want to change their community in the future? That can be pretty scary, you know, because if you're seen as partisan, are you going to lose that trust and general support? And it turns out the good news is, as long as it's from a deep mission-based place, it seems to actually only enhance a museum's reputation. When the Climate Museum in New York takes a stand on climate change, people totally understand they're coming from a point of authenticity. When the Eastern State Penitentiary went from just being a historic site talking about famous people were imprisoned here to saying, no, mass incarceration is a huge issue in the US, and let's talk about that and the effects on society, they got total respect, and their attendance went up. And that's happened at other historic prisons that took on an issue-based interpretation as well.
Don't they face some challenges, too, in responding in a timely way to some of these issues?
Yes, and that has been one of the big shifts in culture museums have had to take on, is we no longer have the luxury of saying, well, let's wait and see what the historians say about this in 20 years, right? If something happens in our communities, they want us to be there talking about it and helping them deal with it now, not 10 years from now.
Which is a challenge, since most museums plan their exhibits a few years in advance.
Yeah, it means being more nimble. It means being more open to something that may look imperfect, but is more responsive to people's needs.
Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And I think we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers.
Very good.
Right.
All right.
You wanna,
Matt. So switching over to Matt now. Matt, from your perspective, what's the most dramatic change that's currently occurring in the themed entertainment?
I'm gonna take one of your top 10. I'm gonna take the Instagrammable moment. I think it may seem kind of like a stealthy change or a kind of Trojan horse change, but I think it's a major change because basically it comes down to the fact that we all carry phones, we're all visitors, guests, and how we experience themed entertainment has changed and is increasingly changing because of that. For me, this was the year that I realized people taking photographs and posting was no longer just about recording their experience. It actually was the experience of using basically themed entertainment as a backdrop for their social media lives. And that to me is a game changer, where the experience itself shifts outside of the park and to this other place, which is the world of social media. It's not just the pop-up experiences that you talked about. I'm actually more interested in this trend coming into the theme park and the museum sector. I don't know how many of you went to the Kusama Infinity Room exhibition as it toured around in the major art museums. You know, fantastic experience. People posting like crazy on social media. You might think, what's wrong with that? It's great publicity, free marketing for the museum. For me, the basic thing is it's a paradigm shift, because what great museums and great theme parks share is the ability to take us out of ourselves, to transport us to other worlds, to tell us stories that we never imagined, and introduce us to characters we didn't think of ourselves. And in a way, this other paradigm of the Instagrammable moment is pulling us back into ourselves. And so I think that's a trend, and it's a challenge for those of us in the themed entertainment to grapple with, because, again, I don't think it's going away.
Very good. So what does that mean in terms of what your clients are asking for now? How do you handle that as a strategic thinker and a designer?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing from clients is, again, given what was your top 10 go big or go home thing, so you have the absolutely iconic experiences, and here we are at Disney. You can't get much more iconic than that. Some clients, we're finding, one way to compete is to go actually in the opposite direction, and to go to things that I kind of call the hyper-local experience, where rather than being universal, global, all-encompassing, they're reaching for experiences that are extremely tied to place. And by the way, all of you here, if you want to have a great hyper-local experience, go to the Anaheim Packing District. It's about a 10-minute drive from here, and it's a very nice adaptive reuse of a building that used to be where they packed oranges when Anaheim was known for agriculture. And they've built on that story and done a very nice, again, retail, mixed use, and food experience. The branding, the building, everything works together to kind of tell this hyper-local story. You know, Dollywood, great hyper-local story. Another great example I'd throw out there from the museum world. If you haven't been to Bentonville, go to Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. This is a museum dedicated to American art in the heartland of America, and everything, in a way, before you get to the galleries is a pre-show, whether you're staying at the 21C Hotel, walking through small town America, walking through this beautiful landscape before you get to the building that all says Heartland America, and it makes the experience of American art quite different from at the Met or someplace that's kind of universal, again, kind of all-encompassing. Instead, it's this very, very hyper-local experience.
Very good. So Matt, you started off really in the cultural attraction world, and you sort of migrated into a mix now between cultural and commercial attractions. What does that mean in terms of the differences that you see, you know, across those attraction types, and similarities in the work that you're doing?
So what's the difference between a museum and a theme park? You know, here's, from my perspective, the real secret is there really isn't. If you start with fundamentals, and fundamentals for us is guests and what the needs and wants and dreams of the guests. It's the same guests considering whether to go to Disneyland or whether to go to the Getty Museum. So in a way, if you start with the fundamentals of what people want and dream, it's very, very similar. Now, from a business standpoint, how I sell into those industries is different. You heard a great presentation about the Herschen family and their mission-driven business. So again, it's not just nonprofits that are mission-driven. The language that you use about mission and purpose might vary a little bit depending on which client you're talking to, but I think basically, at the end of the day, more similarities and differences.
Very good. You're also very active in Asia now. I know you travel the globe. I'm continually trying to get a hold of you, and you're on a different time zone. What can you tell us about trends that are occurring in Asia?
Sure, and again, from the presentation this morning, yes, China is slowing, but 6% growth is still, it's a big economy and it's still growing. There are major changes we're experiencing doing work in China. Probably the biggest one is the way projects are contracted. So just within the last couple of years, there's been a big shift away from sole sourcing, which was how we did all our business. We just were hired to do it, to open-tendered, competitive winning of contracts. And that connects to trend number 2, which is there's a whole lot more competition. We've been in business and doing business in China for 20 years. There used to be a thing where if you were an overseas company, you had some special something. Turns out that was the abnormal condition. And what's happening now is the way it should always have been, which is it's just competitive. There's overseas firms with Chinese staff. There's Chinese firms that are very good, and they have their own very good staff. And so we're just competing on a level playing field. And that combined with the way things are now openly tendered, that's one big change that we're seeing out of China.
Very good. Thank you. Linda?
Great. Well, speaking of Asia, I'd like to turn to Owen. Thank you again for coming all the way from Shanghai to join us. Can you talk a little bit about the state of the themed industry right now in China, and how would you characterize it?
Sure. In fact, this morning, Lauren shared a lot of data. I mentioned a lot about China. And just now I met a lot of friends, even most of the time we are on a con call. The first question will be how we can do business in China. Always mention about China. I established my business in China 20 years before. I work as an investor, consultant for government, and also partner with some entertainment business, companies. And I really lucky enough to see and experience what's happening in the past 20 years. I think 20 years before, in China, there are not too many big theme parks, even don't have any MVCs except Qimilong. During that time, they only get 2 parks, and also OCT. They have several Happy Valley. The other, we don't call it a theme park, we call it amusement park, because people just go there and it's free of charge and nothing inside. And 10 years before, great changes happened because central government China encourage entertainment business in China. So they encourage the investment, they encourage real estate and also funding or focus or enter this entertainment business because anyone who invests on theme park or theaters or malls, they can get a cheap land or even land free. They can build a house and resell it. Government use this policy to introduce more investment and fundings to help China to expand the entertainment business. So you can see that in the past 10 years, on the global top 10, half of them are Chinese theme park, like Qimilong, like OCT, Songchen, and also Fangte. But we have some successful one, same as successful as Qimilong, but we also have a lot of failure project. But this failure project then rely on the bad supplier or the bad machine or the bad image, because we during the past 10 years we have nearly global the best team to do that. We use the most advanced rights to do the theme park, but some theme park, because the business runners, they aim for lands, not for the theme park. They earn enough on the houses. When they sold it out, they care less about the theme park. They aim for another land again. I think things changed 3 years before. It's good things that last year, me and Thomas and also David, we are invited to involve TA in a CIIE, which is central government organized a very big conference. During that time, we met the chairman with the dean from the Culture and Tourism Bureau. It's a new bureau. And we talked with them. They realized all the bad performing or all the bad project or theme park, because from the central government, they are not educated to know how to run the business well. They give the wrong rules. So they ask TA to be helped, to cooperate with them, can help the central government to be educated, to know the entertainment business, then to restructure the rules. So recently, you will see that a lot of projects are canceled or the funding is holding, and that means government are not supporting it, because the central government want to get everything whole and take it back and restructure it. For example, right now the new rules published 2 years before, anyone who invests on entertainment business, you should have your theme park open. Then you can get the free land. You should have your mall open. Then you have the theme. You can get the free land, a cheap land, but with a certain percentage. That means all the investments or fundings before they aim for lands, they have to focus on make a successful theme park first. Then they can get good land. So that means in China, I think in the next 10 years is even better. I think it's a better period or market than the past 10 years. But the question will be, the opportunity is there. Are we ready for that? Are you ready just to sell your products, or are you ready to plan it ahead, to cooperate and develop together with a good partner and to enjoy the whole profit in the next 10 years?
Thanks, John. That insider view of China is, I think, really, really invaluable for a lot of us. What about FECs and IP? We've been monitoring that a bit in China. Can you talk about that?
Yes. In fact, for IPs, I've served for Merlin for some project in China. I helped them to expand in China. I know 7 years before, Merlin already focused on FEC, or they call it Midway. Among Merlin Global 110 attractions, more than 90, I think right now it's 96 Midway, which is FEC, for most of the FECs. And Pack Windows, they also, 5 years before, they start to purchase IP and they focus on FEC. The reason is that because most of theme park, they will affect by the weather. Once it's raining, once it's become really cold or rainy season are really long, the business will drop. But for FEC, which is indoor, especially on more business, so it's well protected, whether it's good weather or bad weather. Especially bad weather, even it's hot or snowing, the business is really good for indoor. In the past 10 years, as I said, government encouraged a lot of real estate enter this entertainment business. They invest on theme park, at the same time they invest huge on malls. Even right now, because the e-commerce, the more business in China, I think in globally, drop quite well. Especially China, the more business drop. So entertainment business, family entertainment business, or FECs, is the one they target for. But in China, recently, you will see that young parents with kids, they are really rich. They can afford to fly out everywhere. They already know which is good, which is bad. So for common FEC, without theme or without IP, are not attractive. So right now, strong IP FECs are really, really, I think, badly needed in China. We have several projects we are investing on, even some like Hasbro's Nerf. The first one, the first one open, Nerf FEC will be in Asia, will be in Singapore. Cartoon Network, the first one will be open next year in China. So I think even the IP owners now, they value FEC much and they value China market much.
Oh, thank you. What about for people here? I mean, you regularly work with international operators and brands who are exploring or investing in China. For people here, who are interested in that, can you talk about, what are international companies doing right? What are they doing wrong? And what advice would you give to people who are looking to enter the China market? Or do better in the China market?
I experienced a lot of good experience as well as bad experience. I think I could talk a whole day for a lot of examples. But to summarize, I think I raised up 3 points. First, you should know China. If you want to do any business in China, if you want to make a hit, you should go to China to send your team or yourself to do survey yourself, not only rely on some report. For example, when we choose a location, we usually use the traffic, especially the population. In China, most of the cities over 5 million, 8 million, it's so easy. There are so many cities like this. Some are even over 20 million population with that city. So through that report, you will see, this city is really crowded and also a good location. But in China, city from city are quite different. Some cities have big population, but they are really poor area. They are not fit for that. For some location, for example, Shenyang, they got 20 million population in that city, but it's really hot in summertime. It's really cold, snowing, frozen on winter days. They can operate 6 months for a whole year. So I think any business, any theme park business there is a dead end. So there's a lot of failure experience there. And also, I think for international companies, for us, should respect your investors or partners, especially some, because the Chinese culture is totally different with the Western. China are more, I think, focused on family, and everything is around family, everything is around the communication. And also, if you want to do something, you should get more resources or learn more or listen more of local voice. So it's more like a localization is most important. And second point is that you need a good partner. Because in China, you can easily find, when you want to do business there, if you are a vendor or if you are even you are a business runner, a lot of people approach to you. They say that I have this project, I have this funding, I have that location. But for a reliable partnership is very important because most of still till right now, most of projects are still aimed for money or aimed for funding. I make two examples, good example of two client partners we are doing. One is indoor, one is outdoor. Indoor is Longfor. Longfor, they own 30 successful mall called Paradise Walk mall already. In the coming 5 years, they will reach 70. That means they already have existing their own malls, enough malls to support any FECs. So they would like to invest on this. So that means once you have products, once you are vendors, you don't worry about the bad location, you don't worry about the bad flow, you don't worry about the payment are not on time. For example, the other example for theme park runner is called Sida Group. They are the top 500 global fortune company, very rich company. Before they enter this theme park business, they used 2 years to buy 2,000 travel agencies, which is offline. Till today, they have 3,000 travel agencies that owned by themselves. In the coming 5 years, they will reach to 6,000 travel agencies. That means they already solved already have enough sales. After that, they are not buying lands. They buy existing theme park, unsuccessful theme park, but in a very good location, or they buy land in a tourism destiny city. So once they do that, they already have sales channel. They just need products to upgrade it because they are quite powerful on the sales, so they don't worry about this. So they have enough money to invest on all the capex. So they just need more good products to upgrade it. A good example for one of the projects right now is in Qingdao. It's a 1 hour drive from downtown. Before opening, they will open next year. Before opening, they already pre-sell 700,000 tickets to Citrus already. That means before your opening, they already have a huge income already. For such kinds of project, I don't think it will become failure. I don't think you have problem with the payment or design work. You just need to find the right partner to do that. The last point will be once you have right partner, they have good location, funding, but you need a professional team of staff to run for it. Even without the proper operation, especially on sales and marketing operation team, it will be still be a failure in the future. So that's my point.
Thanks, Owen.
You're welcome.
Great, very good. So Kieran, bringing it back to sort of the domestic market here, you have been in the industry a very long time, led Six Flags for a very long time, and then transitioned over to leading Premier Parks. And from your perspective, what are the most notable changes that are occurring in the industry currently for theme parks and also water parks?
Well, it is amazing to me the number of really profound changes since I started the first Premier Parks back in '89 with one park and long before we bought Six Flags from Time Warner. But I'd like to probably focus on three of them. I mean, the change in the competitive landscape here in the U.S., the change in the consumer, and then, of course, the changes in media and technology. And to maybe put it in perspective, you know, in many ways, the decade of the 90s was the salad days for the big theme parks, and we really had it easy, and it was actually pretty simple. You know, even though new media outlets were emerging, they hadn't really taken hold. There was just an unlimited amount of new equipment that you could put in, and we pretty much could put a big coaster in a park, pop attendance 100,000, take a year off, hold on to 70,000 of it, put another ride in, pick up 100. I mean, it was pretty simple. And so, of course, it's changed dramatically, starting with the competitive landscape. If you go back to the 80s, it's very interesting. Six Flags was really a regional brand with national recognition. There were really only 12 parks in 8 markets, even when we bought it from Time Warner. Cedar Fair, and this still is amazing, was just 2 parks. Hirsch and Family Entertainment was a far different company and has grown materially. So I would say in that era too, I could identify 150 individually owned parks throughout the U.S. to acquire. So if you, and even the destination parks, you know, the international build out for Disney and Universal hadn't happened other than Japan. So there's just today a complete plethora of competition, and it's not just from within the theme park sector, but clearly when you think about everything, even in the outdoor arena, from a Top Golf to Dave & Buster's, I mean, just on and on and on. And then, of course, what's gone on with gaming and esports and everything else. So I think that's made it incredibly competitive. Although the good news is we're still a healthy industry. It's just a much tougher one to play in. And I guess on the consumer side, it's very interesting to me. I mean, one of the things everyone talks about it a lot is, you know, the change in time, right? So back in the day, we did a lot of group business. We could do all sorts of things. People would come. They would devote 6 to 8 hours. And so now trying to get on someone's agenda because of all the things pulling on them is much more difficult. But what's also interesting is their expectations are so much higher, and their tolerance for what we used to take for granted, long lines in the hot sun in Texas or whatever. I mean, that's really changed. And of course, technology has changed it. I mean, when I get a phone call from someone in Europe saying, I saw how your roller coaster had a problem in Oklahoma City because someone's videoing just the fact that the coaster stopped because of a sensor, it just sort of makes you realize how it's changed. And of course, what that really means is you can't hide. And word of mouth, which has always been the most important thing in any business, you know, entertainment or food and beverage. Well, if you think about what the internet's done, it's just taken word of mouth to this incredible level. And so, you know, that's also, so all of those things have, you know, changed. Consumers are much more sophisticated. I mean, back in the day, even as late as the 80s, people didn't really fly as much to Disney and all these places. They have all experienced this now. So their reference point is very different. But and it's led to some other things. I mean, you know, the growth of season pass. So I can remember refereeing these endless debates between the revenue guys and the marketing people, and really season pass was sort of considered a negative thing. We said negative things about them as our customers, and of course, with Six Flags really leading the charge, they've got an excellent marketing director, Brett Pettit, who came out of the Paramount Group, and he, you know, really established that program, and Tom Ivan, Chief Operating Officer, and of course Jim Reed Anderson. I mean, they've blown it out. And as a consequence, the level of season pass sales in the major markets compared to when I was running the business is just mind-blowing, and it's driven the business. And they're now taking it to the next level with memberships, which taking a page out of, you know, health clubs and other things. And of course, that locks in that recurring revenue. But all of that's allowing them to speak directly to their customer and changing the way that, you know, that they can market. So, and then of course with media, you know, there's just so many more outlets. it's so much harder, to get to the consumer. Although again, the internet is helpful and social media, although it's a challenge, right? Because you have to figure out, how do I communicate my message in 2 or 3 seconds as opposed to a 30-second TV ad, right? So you have all of that. But and with one last word on that, I think that's only going to accelerate. Although in my end of the business, which is much more local again, is we can't abandon the other forms of media. So we feel we've got a layer. We can, and we even find direct mail still works in small ways. So, and of course, this has been much less of an impact in the water park business, which again I think is because that's a more local. You're really close to the customer. They view it more as their, sort of swim club in the summer. And where the emphasis there is, you just have to make the experience more welcoming, and so cabanas and the bars and all of that. So.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Let's talk a bit about your parks. You're focused on mid-sized markets and correspondingly mid-sized parks, and you do so largely without a major brand recognition or IPs. We've seen obviously tremendous growth in that across our industry. How do you maintain your competitiveness?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because we are much more the local play. And I certainly, after buying Six Flags from Time Warner and being able to deploy the Six Flags brand and the Looney Tunes DC comic characters, I think we rebranded 15 parks throughout the US and Mexico, Canada, and Europe. And the response was incredible, how we expanded those markets. And the impact it has on your ability to leverage sponsorship, advertising, name recognition, sort of almost to instantaneously change the game for your park, right? But I would argue that those are powerful advantages, but what we're trying to do in our business is to be a local brand. And forget us for a second. If you think about Knott's Berry Farm, one of those incredibly iconic brands that Cedar Fair owns, or you think about Lagoon in Salt Lake City, or you think, these are local brands, and they're all built on what the gentleman from Hershon was talking about, but they're built over a longer horizon. It's something that takes consistency and effort year in, year out. And then from my perspective, you really just have to know your niche. Because if you're in that market and you're trying to butt heads with Six Flags, you're going to lose that every time, or Cedar Fair or whatever. And Cedar Fair is the best example of where they don't really have any kind of national brand. Now they use Snoopy in some of the parks, but they thrive because Canada's Wonderland or King's Dominion are all there. So.
Very good. Finally, what changes do you see occurring in markets and consumer behavior, such as the rise of in-home entertainment, and how does that influence your decision-making for parks, your operations, your planning, things like that?
Well, there's no doubt, it has an impact, and I think you have to be observant. However, I used to say this when I was raising money back in the 90s and continuing. The good news is we're not a buggy whip business. And I do think consumers still want to have a live, out-of-home, real experience. And if you think about it, whether it's hiking, on a very tall peak, or it's, at the top of a roller coaster, I mean, those are still experiences that I think people enjoy, and they will be recurring. I do think you have to add in some of the VR stuff, like I know Six Flags has done a great job with Sally Corporation's new generation of dark rides, but I think you kind of have to do that sparingly so that you don't lose your core of what you're really offering the consumer. And I think what you have to be, is very fixated on guest service and making it a seamless, efficient market and all of that. From my perspective, that's the operating side. From an M&A point of view, I'm increasingly focused on attractions that are in major customer areas. So for instance, we're very thrilled with our recent acquisition of City Museum in St. Louis. I'm most thrilled with the fact that we do nearly 800,000 people and the marketing budget was zero.
Amazing.
Which is a really helpful thing. Pacific Park here at Santa Monica, again, very iconic, built over 20 years, and And again, the marketing budget there is $150,000. So being in the middle of everyone, what it really does is you're not fighting for their time. You're not trying to get them out of their house. They're coming to to Santa Monica, and so there's advantages there.
Great, great. Well, thank you for those insights.
Sure.
Well, and as economists, I think I would just have to advise everyone we wouldn't advise planning for that marketing spend for your attractions. There are industry standards that we fully believe in when we do business modeling. Lauren, fantastic presentation. I actually learned a lot. Can you help us wrap up? Based on what you've heard from the panelists, do you have any last thoughts on the relationship between what they're saying and the insights that you're seeing from a macroeconomic perspective?
Absolutely. I think the story really tells itself. Between that macroeconomic backdrop that I presented and the trends that we're seeing, really my one takeaway is that the only constant is change. So from my world, we've had a period of synchronized global growth in the past 5 or so years that really we haven't seen before, where our global economy is firing on all cylinders. And that might not be the case going into later this year and into next year. And so it's about recognizing that change, that we're at an inflection point, that things will be changing. And I think these 10 trends really captured that. People still want to spend money, but in different ways, in these different experiences. I've been fortunate enough to interact with some of the members here and hear about these incredible new technologies, ways that the experience is changing, and it's built to reflect changing demographics. And I think everyone on this stage really embodies that you have to stay tactical, you have to keep moving, but there are those amazing opportunities.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and I believe we have some time for a Q&A.
Yes, please go ahead and if anyone has any questions for this fantastic group of people up here, please put your hand up.
Don't be shy.
Okay. Oh, here's a question. Microphone's coming to you.
One.
Thanks.
Courageous one.
Question is for Owen in the China market. Thank you for your efforts in helping the Chinese government understand our market a little bit better. My question is, when the government wants to give out the land for the development and they're looking for the parks to be built or become, quote, successful before they give away the big land for the commercial development, what do you think success means to the Chinese government?
For Chinese government, in fact, I think Chairman Xi last year on his domestic report on the number 4, he said, right now in China, about entertainment, about culture, there's a gap is the need for high quality demand products, and with the existing poor quality demand, there's a big gap. That means Chinese government realize and they want high quality theme park and also theaters and also shows and also FECs. So I think for China government, what they need is that's why they publish the rules to introduce more, give free lands. They want more upgraded theme park or entertainment business can expand in China to satisfy the demand of local people, local citizens. I think that's the major demand from the central government.
Great, thank you, Owen. Any other questions?
And sorry, that also benefits us because you guys are the real runners, successful runners. You guys is the one Chinese government and also Chinese buyers needed. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question at the back.
Yes, this goes back to Lauren's presentation at the start of this whole block, which is fantastic from all of you. You showed the slide that shows about 60% of personal spending that is really what drives our industry. As we have that continual stagnation or even downward pressure on wage, even if we get to that 4%, how do we see that impacting the spends within our industry versus campsites, which was one of your comps?
Absolutely. Yes, I think it's important to note that consumer spending is still increasing. We are still spending more, so that won't contract in our forecast and in any of my colleagues' forecasts that I'm aware of. But it's important to note that while inflation is a bit higher than it's been, so we are making more as workers, our wages are higher, but inflation's taking a bite out of that paycheck. And I think increasingly, at least in the US, but inflation is rising elsewhere in the world as well, consumers will be more aware of that, of the value of their dollar. So it's about having your competitive advantage, your proposition, value proposition to these people. Why should they be spending their increasingly valuable dollars at your establishments? And that's an important question, I think, that I can't answer for anyone in this room. But recognizing that, yes, the consumer is still the really engine driving this whole gross domestic product, driving the whole economy. And so it's about reacting to those changing tastes and being that value proposition for them.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Any other questions? One more here.
Thanks, Christy. This question is for Karen. My company, I'm a nonprofit museum director, and we are continuing to have the debate on membership versus general admission tickets. How much are you willing to give up for membership renewals, knowing that per caps for members are down, but you're buying that direct advertising or connection?
Well, I'm new to the museum business, so I'm going to be careful not to overstate my expertise there. But in coming into City Museum, it has had a very small membership or season pass. It's really driven by single-day tickets, some group sales. As we do, I mean, my mantra to everyone, I don't even feel so much like an owner there. I feel like I'm sort of the steward of this amazing thing, which is where Meow Wolf got its start, by the way. So, but we've priced a membership that's about 4 times the single-day ticket as a way of really testing the waters. And so, we'll watch and see how that does for us. But in our model, we wouldn't want to switch too much into the membership at that particular location. But we're definitely going to try to do more.
Great. So we are just about out of time. I would like to please ask you to join me with a round of applause for this incredible group of people up here. Thank you to Linda and Brian, who have really driven this, and to all these wonderful speakers. Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And now we will vacate the stage for our next group. Thank you very much.